This lesson is about what to do if we need to add fractions that do not have the same denominator. We call that fractions that have unlike denominators. When we do these kinds of problems, it's important to write the problem vertically up and down, and you'll see why as I go through the problem. There are a few different ways to do this, but one of the ways to do this is to simply take your two denominators that are not alike, your unlike denominators, and the first step in this sort of problem is to multiply the denominators by each other. So we're going to get the product of the two denominators. So what the students do is you find out what's 20 times 4, and the answer is 80. We're going to use that as our common denominator. So to set up the problem, we're going to make equivalent fractions using 80 as our like denominator. So I put in 80 as the denominator for each fraction here. This is a common denominator between these two fractions that originally had unlike denominators. So the next step is to figure out what did I multiply 20 by to get 80. And we know from our work over here that we multiplied 20 by 4. And when we do equivalent fractions, we know that whatever operation we do to the denominator, we have to do the same operation to the numerator. So again, right here, we multiply by 4. 11 times 4 is 44. We do the same process here, making equivalent fractions. So we think, what did we multiply 4 by to get 80? Using our work, we know that we multiplied by 20. So whatever operation we do to the denominator, we do the same operation to the numerator. So we multiply by 20. 1 times 20 is 20. What we've created right here is now we have two fractions with a common denominator, a like denominator. And so we know how to add these together. We keep the common denominator, so our denominator will be 80, and we add the numerators. 44 plus 20 gives us 64. The final step on this sort of problem is we need to reduce our answer. We need to make our answer into lowest terms or simplest form. And we do that through division. And it may take you a few steps to figure out, what do I divide by to reduce this fraction? And that's okay. One of the things that you will see right away is that both numbers are even. So you can always start by dividing by 2. Now the students may need to come over here and do the work, and that's okay. So to do our work over here, we're going to take 64 divided by 2, and when we do the math, we see that 2 divides into 64 32 times, and then 2 divided into 80. When you do the math, you find that 2 divides into 80 40 times. Now we can see that this fraction needs to continue to be reduced. The students may be able to recognize at this time that they can divide by 4. So you divide the numerator and the denominator by the same number, 4. 4 divides into 32 8 times. 4 divides into 40 10 times. Again, the students should recognize we can still reduce this fraction, and we can reduce it by 2. So we reduce again by 2. 2 divides into 8 4 times. 2 divides into 10 5 times. This is the fraction in lowest terms or simplest form. The way that we know that is at this point, the only number that will divide into the numerator and the denominator evenly is 1. And so that shows us that this fraction is now in lowest terms. Going back, the students may have recognized here that they could divide by 8. And if you can do that, what that will do is it'll skip you ahead a few steps. But I did it this way to show you that it's okay for students to go through this process as many times as necessary until they get to the fraction in lowest terms. So again, to add fractions with unlike denominators, one strategy is to multiply the denominators that you're given. And we found that when we multiply 20 times 4, we get 80. We use that as our common denominator. The next step is to create equivalent fractions. So you figure out 20 times 4 gave us 80, so we do the same operation to our numerator. 11 times 4 is 44. You do the same thing here. 4 times 20 gave us 80, So we do the same operation here. 1 times 20 is 20. Now we have two fractions with a common denominator. So we simply keep the denominator, 80, and we add the numerators. The final step for every fraction problem is to check that the fraction is in lowest terms or simplest form. And if it is not, we need to reduce the fraction until we get our fraction in simplest form, which means that the numerator and denominator can both be divided only by 1. That is their common factor. And that is one strategy for adding fractions with unlike denominators.